So I ask at this time, Mr. Foster, if you would, please welcome and bring in our honored veteran guests. Thank you once again for that very warm welcome as we give our honored guests a couple moments as they find their seats. Thank you again for your warm welcome. It has been once said that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. Those who are here before us have not only lived a life of vigilance in their community and throughout the world, but they have led others. They have sacrificed to support freedom, and they are heroes to people in this room and to people everywhere. Here in these front rows, you can see the veteran guests that our student body has invited here today. Our students have decided to invite all of you because they admire you for your courage, for your commitments, and most of all for the sacrifices that you have made for everyone. Thank you again for being here. At this time, I would ask that we formally begin the program by having members of the Esmond Schroeder Post advance the colors. At this time, I'd ask you to please rise and remain standing. This will be immediately followed by the national anthem. Gentlemen, would you please advance the colors? Please be seated. At this time, we would like to take an opportunity to acknowledge the veterans currently or formerly on staff here at Waterford High School to stand and be recognized when I say their names. Would you all please welcome Gary Beck, Matt Hawkinson, Tom Victor, and Dave Richmond. All of the veterans sitting before us today have traveled many miles through ominous conditions, answering the call to perform jobs that others wouldn't do, or very simply others were just afraid to do. These veterans have lived, worked, and slept in very uncomfortable conditions and have traveled to territories that were very unfriendly. Simply put, they have put themselves into harm's way for us all. There are also heroes close to our hearts that are not with us today, as we all know. As you walk through the hallway adjacent to the atrium, you'll see dozens of paper bricks on our honor wall, which has become a bit of a tradition that we do every Veterans Day here at Waterford High School. Our students here and staff members have created these in order to pay tribute to veterans, both living and not living, that are close to our hearts. Each of the bricks represents a commitment that a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, or guardsman has made, and in some cases, those who have gone above and beyond and paid the ultimate sacrifice. Students here at Waterford High School also honor the sacrifice of these individuals in other ways. Some students before us will answer this call themselves. So at this time, what I would ask is that all juniors and seniors who have either enlisted or are in the process of enlisting in our armed forces to please stand and be recognized at this time. Our Veterans Day theme, both this year and last year, have focused on the 5 military branches of our armed forces: the Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, and Coast Guard. Now, last year, if you were with us, you remember that we featured the Army and the Navy. And for today's events, we will focus on the 3 youngest branches: the Marines, the Coast Guard, and the Air Force. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from a former staff member and 3 of our students who have connections to the Marines, Coast Guard, and Air Force. Their stories, as we will hear, represent Waterford's commitments to our veterans, and we're lucky to have them. Now, before we hear our guest speakers, it's my privilege to turn the microphone over to our Badger Boys and Girls State representatives, who will first provide some information on Veterans Day itself, a history of the military branches, and then specifically a little bit about the military branches that we're going to hear from today: the Marines, Coast Guard, and the Air Force. So at this time, it's my privilege to welcome up Matthew Lilla, who will present information on the history of Veterans Day. Matthew.
Veterans Day is a national holiday dedicated to honoring the men and women who have served this nation so well in our military service branches. Originally, this holiday was known as Armistice Day in celebration of the armistice or truce that ended the fighting of World War I. The signed Armistice Treaty ended the fighting officially at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of that year, which was 1918. For that reason, we celebrated Armistice Day on November 11th each year. Many viewed World War I as the war to end all wars. A special day that would honor the veterans of this war seemed as the proper way to pay respect to those who had fought in this last great war. After both World War II and the Korean War, some communities across America began to change its name from Armistice Day to Veterans Day as a way to honor veterans of all wars. The federal government officially changed the name to Veterans Day in 1971. And now, please welcome Cameron Prylis, who will speak about the history of the military branches.
Today for Veterans Day, we would like to highlight the different service branches in our armed forces as they provide defense for our nation. The armed forces are divided up into 4 branches: the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, and are administered by the Department of Defense. In addition to these 4 branches, the Department of Homeland Security has provided further protection for our nation since 9/11. Under the Department of Homeland Security is the Coast Guard, which safeguards our nation's maritime interests in our heartlands, ports, and along our coast. Other organizations run by this department include the Secret Service, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the Transportation Security Administration, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Among all these agencies under the Department of Homeland Security, only those who have actively served in the Coast Guard are considered veterans. Today, however, we would like to focus specifically on the 3 youngest service branches, the Coast Guard, the Air Force, and the Marines. Now, to present information about the Marines is Badger Girl Hannah Merlo.
The history of the United States Marine Corps began with the founding of the Continental Marines in 1775 at the beginning of the Revolutionary War. This branch was created in order to conduct ship-to-ship fighting, provide shipboard security, enforce discipline, and assist in landing forces. Its mission evolved with the ever-changing military doctrine and foreign policy of the United States. Owing to the availability of Marine forces at sea, the United States Marine Corps has served in nearly every conflict in United States history. The Marine Corps has attained its notoriety through the ambitious warfare endeavors, most significantly on the islands of the Pacific Ocean during World War II. The Marines' ability to rapidly respond on short notice in crisis situations has made and continues to make an important tool for American foreign policy. The 3 Marine Corps values, honor, courage, and commitment, make up the bedrock of the character of each individual Marine. They are the foundation of the Corps. These 3 values, handed down from generation to generation, have made U.S. Marine the warrior elite. From the naval actions of the Revolutionary War to the fighting in the mountains of Afghanistan, Marines have served valiantly in every one of our nation's conflicts. Currently, there are over 180,000 Marines on active duty in over 100 countries. We are proud to call 2 of them our own. Please welcome Waterford High School's student Justin Pankowski, representing family members Paul and Doug Backham and Steve Pankowski.
Hi, I'm Justin Pankowski, and these are the Marines in my family. This is my Uncle Paul. He grew up in Milwaukee and went to Rufus King High School. He graduated in 1998 and decided to serve his country as a Marine because he wanted the challenge. He was in the Marines from 1998 to 2002, and in 1998, when he shipped out, he went to first the Marine Corps Recruiting Depot, or the MCRD, and boot camp at Camp Pendleton in San Diego, California. He then attended the School of Infantry and was an 0311, or a grunt. After that, he went to Chesapeake Bay, Virginia, to go to Security Forces School, and then Kings Bay, Georgia, where he guarded the nuclear weapons and sailors. After that, he went to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and joined the Victor 1-2 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines as an infantryman. He was then deployed and bounced around in the Pacific from Okinawa to mainland Japan, Guam, Philippines, and Alaska, before finally coming back to North Carolina. He was discharged in 2002, but then sent back in February of 2003 on standby for the war in Afghanistan. He wasn't deployed and came home in August of that year. He was married in 2005 and now lives in Cudahy with his wife and 2 kids and works as a police training sergeant. He was named Lead Officer of the Year in 2013 and says he would never have gotten the job he has now if it wasn't for the training and work ethic, or in his own words, the decision to get up out of bed every day and work your butt off to make the world a better place that he learned in the Marines. Next is my dad, Steve Pankowski. He grew up on the south side of Milwaukee and went to Milwaukee Tech High School. He graduated in 1990 and couldn't decide between going to college, into the Marines, or at the fire department. His dad helped guide him towards college, but during his freshman year, a lot of his Marine friends were called to active duty for Operation Desert Storm, and during his sophomore year, he started talking to recruiters. He found out that he could do a combination of Marines in college through a program called CATP. That summer, he went to boot camp in Camp Pendleton and graduated with honors with the highest score on the rifle range, 244 out of 250. Thanks to this, when he attended the School of Infantry, he was able to choose what he wanted to be, and he chose an 0331 or a machine gunner. When he graduated the School of Infantry, he came back to Milwaukee with Fox Company. He then graduated MSOE and with a bachelor's degree of mechanical engineering, but by this time, Fox duty had returned from active duty in Iraq. He spent the rest of his time there and left as an E3 Lance Corporal. During his time at MSOE, he was working at a metal stamping company, and he now took the position at the company called RES as his first degreed engineer. He used the discipline and leadership learned and observed in the Marines and started to take on managerial roles until he became the vice president. Eventually, in August of 2014, he was offered the president's role. Now he lives in Waterford with his kids and wife, and to this day makes connections with the people he sees wearing Marine stuff. Just this summer, we were at the Boston airport, and a man he had never seen and probably never will again came up, shook his hand, and said Semper Fi, and walked away. It's these kind of connections that really set Marines apart. Finally, this is my grandpa, Doug Bachman. He was born and raised on the south side of Milwaukee and the Bayview area. He attended Boys Tech, which is now called Milwaukee Tech High School. He joined the Marines because he thought they were the best branch. He wanted to join before the end of his senior year, but his mom wouldn't sign his papers, and he told her he would finish high school if she had signed him, but he wouldn't have. He enlisted in 1963 and went to San Diego, California to the Marine Corps Recruiting Depot and then boot camp at Camp Pendleton. He attended the School of Infantry for Mechanics and a 3516 or automotive mechanic. He worked on vehicles in Pendleton until being deployed to Vietnam in 1965 for his one-year tour. He was stationed at Kinone and Da Nang and worked on vehicles, went on patrols and convoys, and he says he volunteered for everything that he could. He came home in 1996 and married my grandma in January of 1967. They lived on base together until June when they came home to Wisconsin. He ended up being a mechanic and worked for trucking companies his entire life. He learned from the Marines to never quit or give up, always finish what you start, and especially always be on time. He had 4 kids and is now retired, living in Milwaukee. He loves Packers and his family, and I can't remember the last time I saw him without some sort of Marines clothing on. These 3 men I am proud to call my family have made a huge impact on the lives of many people, not to mention me. I hope to follow in their footsteps one day and become a Marine myself. Yesterday, the Marines celebrated their 241st birthday. Yes, they are older than the United States itself. And for the past 241 years, they and men like them have been American hellhounds wreaking havoc on Earth to keep people like us safe, as my uncle puts it. They truly are the few, the proud, the Marines. Thank you. I am now going to turn the mic over to Sammy Mayer with her stepfather, John Sobieski.
In 1980, my stepdad, John Sobieski, graduated from Muskego High School and immediately joined the Air Force Reserves. He was there for 3.5 years until transferring to the United States Marine Corps. When I asked him why, he responded by saying he wanted to serve and wanted to better himself as a person. In 1984, John spent 13 weeks at the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego for basic training. After this, he was transferred to Meridian, Mississippi Naval Air Station and was in charge of aviation supply. The first base he was stationed at was Marine Corps Air Force New River, where he volunteered for a Mediterranean cruise. In 1986, he was on the USS Guadalcanal off the coast of Libya for 6 to 7 months. While there, he took part in the sinking and bombing of their ships and planes. A year later, John left to patrol the Persian Gulf when Iran had laid mines in the water. He swept for mines for 5 months. Eventually, Ayatollah Khomeini threatened to sink the Guadalcanal, and his crew was forced to sneak through the Strait of Hormuz at night. The Guadalcanal was a helicopter carrier, and John's duty was to take care of maintenance of the helicopters and supplies. During his years of service, John acquired several medals, including a Marine Corps Good Conduct Medal and a Sea Service Deployment Ribbon. John came back from this cruise in 1987 and continued to serve at MCAS New River. He was formally out of the military in 1990. He started his own drywall company and now works as an expediter for Applewood Drywall. In 2006, John met my mom, and 10 years later, here we are. I'm so grateful for his service to this country and for his service to my family. Thank you. I would now like to welcome back Hannah Merlo to talk about the history of the United States Air Force.
For over 100 years, the United States military has endeavored to master not just the battlefields that we sail or march upon, but the realms of air and space. The Air Force's history began with the creation of the Aeronautical Division of the U.S. Signal Corps in 1907, which soon became part of the U.S. Army. Airplanes and their pilots played an enormous role in World War II and were crucial to the Allied victories in every theater of the war. An overall reorganization of the U.S. military following World War II led to the creation of the U.S. Air Force, finally making it an independent and equal branch of the military within the Department of Defense. The Air Force's area of responsibility was extended into space in 1982 when the Air Force Space Command was created, which launches, operates, and protects satellites for military use, including weather, communications, and GPS satellites. Today, the Air Force continues its traditions of innovation, constantly striving to produce ever more sophisticated platforms in both air and space to protect the nation from those who would seek to do us harm. Its pilots fly jet fighters that have not lost an air-to-air engagement in over 40 years, while its bombers can penetrate anywhere in the world, protected by stealth technology. Its special operations and personal recovery teams maintain the dedication of their forebears to leave no one behind and to have the willing to sacrifice so others may live. There are currently over 300,000 active and 100,000 reserve members of the United States Air Force serving around the world. Please welcome Sammy Mayer once again to present her grandfather, Tom Nickloff.
In 1965, my grandpa, Tom Nickloff, graduated high school when he was 17 in Syracuse, New York. As soon as he turned 18, he joined the Air Force because he felt a military obligation with the conflict in Vietnam going on. He served for 24 years. During his first 17 years of service, Tom was an aerospace systems operator and technician where he dealt with radar operations and controlled aircraft and weapons. For the last 7 years of his service, Tom was first sergeant, where he was in charge of all the troops in his command. Throughout his 24 years of service, Tom was stationed all around the world in places such as Hawaii, Alaska, Vietnam, Minnesota, the Philippines, New York, and Massachusetts, and also acquired several medals, such as a humanitarian award from Vietnam. He would coach the basketball team for the little kids in Vietnam and was just displayed his excellent leadership skills. He also received a medal from the Department of Defense for deterring a Russian aircraft when he was working in a radar station, and an outstanding individual award for his acts of courage for stopping a forest fire near his base in Massachusetts. After retiring from the service in 1990, he went to work as a normal civilian. In 2000, he and my grandma left their home in Cape Cod to help my mom raise me in Wisconsin. After learning about all of the achievements and selfless acts of John and Tom, I feel extremely proud and honored to call them my stepdad and grandpa. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Sydney Zulke, presenting her father, James Zulke.
Hello, I'm Sydney Zilke, and this is my father, Chief Master Sergeant James Zilke of the United States Air Force. When I asked my dad why he decided to join the Air Force, he said, to serve my country and learn a new profession. So at the age of 21, my dad enlisted. Since joining the Air Force in 1992, my father has been on numerous deployments to over 15 countries, some of which include Colombia, Turkey, Afghanistan, Iraq, and the United Arab Emirates. On a deployment to Colombia, my father provided security and support of the drug enforcement mission. Specifically, my father provided protection and performed security details for the pilots and assets as they transited in and out of Colombia. After the Twin Towers were attacked in New York in 2001, my father volunteered to pull security shifts at his military base in Milwaukee. He was activated shortly thereafter and would eventually deploy to Turkey, Afghanistan, and Cuba. He was based in Turkey but spent most of his time between Afghanistan and Cuba. My dad was a part of the Detainee Operations Mission, which was the first of its kind in the United States Air Force. There, he transported detainees from Afghanistan to Cuba. These detainees were from all parts of the world and were assisting in terroristic operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other countries to include ours. Then, in 2005, my dad deployed for about 11 months. He was based out of Qatar, but would travel to Afghanistan, Iraq, and other countries as a protective services agent. There, he provided security details for the four-star generals running the war operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was to the four-star generals as the Secret Service is to the president. Some of his duties included site advances, limo and chase driver, and personal protection. As a chase driver, my father would provide protection for the dignitaries by driving immediately behind or next to the dignitary's vehicle and would act as a barrier between the general and any potential threat, such as a bomb or shooter. One of the generals he successfully protected had a $50 million bounty on his head. Most recently, my father deployed in 2015 for 10 months to the Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates. The UAE is a desert climate, and my dad experienced temperatures in excess of 120 degrees. There, he supported the 380th Air Expeditionary Wing, which provides command and control of the airspace above Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. His specific assignment was that of Inspector General Liaison for the deployed forces. During his 24 years with the United States Air Force, he has served as a Security Forces member, intelligence analyst, first sergeant, and Security Forces manager. He currently serves in the Air Force Reserves with the 927th Air Refueling Wing out of MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida. He commutes to Florida monthly to perform his duties. As a Chief Master Sergeant in the United States Air Force, he is a senior enlisted advisor and acts as a bridge between the junior enlisted and officers. While at home, my father is a law enforcement officer with the Racine Police Department. Since 1995, he has held the positions of patrolman, street-level gang and drug unit member, drug unit supervisor, SWAT commander, tactics instructor, and is currently in the investigative bureau commander. He is also the father of 3 girls who could not be more proud of their dad and all that he does for his family and his country. Thank you, Dad, for your service. Next, I would like to introduce Badger girl Grace Sowens, who will present the history of the Coast Guard.
The United States Coast Guard is a military force and federal law enforcement agency that dedicates itself to maritime safety and security missions. The Coast Guard began in 1790 when President George Washington authorized the construction of 10 vessels to enforce federal tariff and trade laws and to prevent smuggling. Since these early days, many more tasks were added to the responsibilities of the Coast Guard. The nation now has a single maritime agency dedicated to saving life at sea, protecting the environment, defending the homeland, and enforcing the nation's maritime laws. The Coast Guard is one of the oldest organizations of the federal government, and until Congress established the Department of the Navy in 1798, it served as the nation's only armed force on water. The Coast Guard has protected the nation throughout its long history and has served in a majority of the United States conflicts. In times of peace, it is a major part of the Department of Homeland Security and in times of war or at the direction of the President, the Coast Guard serves as a part of the Department of the Navy. The Coast Guard currently has a force of 38,000 active duty guardsmen and 8,000 reservists. Each day, on average, they will board 90 large vessels, seize 350 pounds of legal drugs, investigate 17 maritime accidents, save 14 lives, assist 328 people in distress, and save $2.4 million in property. Waterford Union High School proudly welcomes former WUHS teacher Diane Harriod to present her son John and his service in the Coast Guard.
My son John right now is connected to my speakerphone. He lives in Texas, so a little far to come. Today I'm here to introduce to you my 31-year-old son John Harriod, a Coast Guard veteran with 12 years of service. John is the fourth of 5 sons, a young man who in high school was not that enamored with education and was a tenacious youth who liked to argue. On July 3rd, 2003, the day after his 18th birthday, John left for boot camp in Cape May, New Jersey. His first assignment was Fire Island, New York, where he spent 9 months doing a lot of search and rescue of civilian boaters who would get lost in the ocean, especially on foggy days and in the dark. Next, it was on to Galveston, Texas. 2 months later, he found himself in the midst of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. Imagine being 19, dropped in a flooded city with a pup tent to sleep in, MRE rations to eat, baby wipes for your shower, no electricity, and a map that did little good because everything was flooded. His job was to protect the EMTs and firemen and lead them around in their small boats, rescuing people from their attics and marking houses where they found dead residents. He says he will never forget the smell. During this time, he was privileged to meet and speak with President Bush. Most of his time in Galveston was spent learning about oil spill recovery and fast rescue operations that happen around oil rigs. Because the Coast Guard was founded in 1790 with the duty of safeguarding our maritime areas and safeguarding our environment. In 2008, his next move was to Miami, Florida, and he became a member of a maritime safety and security team. They protected high-interest individuals, important waterways, vital infrastructure, ports, and cargo. Today, he's pursuing a degree in seaport management at Texas A&M, using his veterans benefits and following that interest. At times, their MSST unit went to different locations, including things like the Super Bowl in Jacksonville, the All-Star Game in Philadelphia, the Clinton Library dedication in Little Rock, and Detroit for a large Supreme Court justice meeting. In the Coast Guard, he spent tons of time training. He had SWAT training, FBI training, nuclear training, quick response training, fast boat rescue training, and vertical insertion training, where you leave a hovering helicopter with an 80-pound pack and only your hands and your feet on the rope. No safety harnesses, because you have to be fast. Your gloves are literally smoking by the time you hit the deck. He then became part of Tacklet South, an enforcement team that focuses on maritime intruders, security, and counter-narcotics. This was John's favorite assignment. Today, 80% of all drugs use maritime routes to arrive in the U.S. They come via shipping containers, large cargo boats, fishing boats, cigar boats, and narco subs. About 75% of all drug interception led to a kingpin being arrested. That results in over 500 a year. In 2008, one of the years John was in Miami, the Coast Guard nationally intercepted 360,000 pounds of cocaine with a value of $4.9 billion, and the numbers keep going up. The Coast Guard also trains and works with other international governments. John is trained in African Coast Guard on narcotics intervention and has worked on both Danish and British naval ships in the Caribbean. He has also returned illegal migrants from Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Mexico. So what is John doing today? 3 years ago, he was medically discharged from the Coast Guard due to spine and arm injuries incurred in fast roping. Due to extreme heat conditions that he's always worked in, he has also been diagnosed with an extremely rare kidney disease called Gittleman syndrome. He has nothing but praise for the medical help that he has received. However, he does feel that our government needs to do more to help a lot of the young veterans with transitions to civilian life jobs, because there's been a lot of offers of $10 an hour part-time work, but mostly with mental health issues. When you are sick, when you're unemployed, it's easy to get depressed, it's easy to drink too much, it's easy to give up. 2 years ago at Christmas, when I put him back on a plane to Texas, I was afraid I was not ever going to see him alive again. But thank God for that teenage tenaciousness he showed. He went back and refused to leave a psychologist's office until someone saw him, even if it meant getting him arrested. The suicide prevention program the military has now that they are so proud of consists mostly of rubber band bracelets with call numbers on it and a phone number and a visit with a volunteer. And maybe, if you're lucky, a visit with a mental health person over Skype. That doesn't work fast enough to get help in time. He's finally getting the help he needs, thanks to his own tenaciousness, and is in much better mental shape. Amen. 4 of his friends were not so lucky. They committed suicide in the last 3 years. John has a ways to go. He needs a career. He needs to finish his degree. And he needs to learn to manage his Gittleman syndrome. But there is hope again. And you know what? He wouldn't have changed anything about his choice to join the Coast Guard. Thank you.
At this time, it's my honor to please welcome to all of you the WUHS Symphonic Band performing Duty, Honor, and Country, composed by Harold Walters, narrated by Hannah Hinners.
This narration the narration is taken from a text by General Douglas MacArthur as a presentation to the Military Academy in 1962.
Duty, honor, country. A code of conduct and chivalry of those who guard this beloved land. An ideal so noble that it arouses a sense of pride and yet humility. An expression of the ethics of the American man at arms. Duty, honor, country. Those 3 words build courage when courage seems to fail. Regain faith when there seems to be little cause for faith. Create hope when hope seems forlorn. The American man-at-arms above all other people prays for peace, for he must suffer and bear the deepest wounds and scars of war. Duty, honor, country. The unbelievers will say that they are but words, a slogan, or a flamboyant phrase. Every demagogue, every cynic, and every hypocrite will try to downgrade them to the extent of mockery and ridicule. The code which these words perpetuate embraces the highest moral law and will stand the test of any ethics or philosophies ever published for the uplift of mankind. Around 1,000 campfires, on 100 battlefields, listening for the witching melody of faint bugles blowing reveille, far-off drums beating the long roll. This is the story of the American man-at-arms. His name and fame are the birthright of every American citizen. In his youth and strength, his love and loyalty, he gave all that mortality can give. He has never failed us. Were he to do so, 1,000,000 ghosts in olive drab, in brown khaki, in blue and gray would rise from their white crosses, thundering those magic words: duty, honor, country.
Once again, thank you very much for that performance, the WUHS Symphonic Band. At this time, we will begin the conclusion of our event. In a moment, we will retire the colors, which will be followed by the playing of the musical piece Taps by Waterford students Graham Gross and Nathan Schmitz. During this time, we will also, the members of the Esmond Schroeder Post will be conducting a gun salute to honor fallen soldiers. This is a reminder that at this time to please, when directed, remain standing, silent out of respect during this portion of the ceremony. With that said, gentlemen, would you please retire the colors? And ladies and gentlemen, would you all please rise? At this time, if we could just have a moment of silence to honor all service members, past and present. Thank you. Would you all please be seated once again? I'd like to take this opportunity to briefly thank all of the individuals who made today's events possible. First, to members of the Social Studies Department for assisting with the honor wall and other events details, especially Mr. Vogt and Mr. Leonard. We'd also like to thank Mr. Beck and Mr. Boss for setting up the stage, the gymnasium, and the LGI. Ms. Birmingham and her class for helping with the spotlight and the reception decorations. Mr. Gross and Mr. Hegeman for providing the technology support today. Mr. Nelson and the band for their performance earlier as well. We'd also like to thank in advance Mrs. Hamilton and Mrs. Rajeski for preparing the food that our veteran guests are going to have at their luncheon in just a few minutes. And last but not least, we'd also like to thank the WUHS students for your respect and attention paid during this event. Once again, veterans, thank you. We ask at this time any student who has a veteran in attendance this morning to come up nearest to the stage for a group picture before we ultimately would dismiss. If you do not have a veteran guest, what we would do at this time then is we are going to dismiss our senior class first, who will receive additional information and details once you get into the atrium. Senior class, please be dismissed. All other classes, please remain seated unless you have a veteran guest, in which case you can come up and meet them at this time.